The sun was sinking low over Florida horizon, the sky painted in streaks of orange and blood red as the palm trees swayed in the heavy evening breeze. Detective Alicia Monroe sat in her cruiser, the leather of the seat sticking to her back with sweat, her badge glinting under the faint glow of the dashboard light. It had been another long day. In this part of Florida, crime never slept. Domestic disputes, drug overdoses, thefts gone wrong. Every call blurred into the next. She had worn her uniform for nearly 15 years, and yet some nights still felt unbearable. Alicia was a woman who carried the weight of two worlds. On the streets, she was the one people called when danger came knocking. In her home, she was both mother and father to her teenage daughter, Jasmine, doing her best to shield her from the ugliness she saw every day. To the community, she was a respected officer. To her daughter, she was the only anchor in a stormy world. But deep down, Alicia knew she was stretched thin, fighting battles at work and carrying secrets at home. The night air smelled faintly of salt water drifting inland from the Gulf. Alicia rolled down her window, hoping for relief, but the humidity clung to her like a second skin. She pressed her fingers against her temples, trying to ease the dull ache forming there. She had been telling herself for months that she would take some time off, maybe drive Jasmine down to Miami Beach. Let the kid feel normal for once. But then the radio would crackle with another call, and she would shove the thought aside. Her partner that day, Detective Marcus Hill, leaned against the cruiser as he finished filing paperwork. Marcus was a man built like a wall, his grizzled face telling the story of years in the line of duty. He looked at her with a kind of brotherly concern. "You've been carrying the whole precinct on your back, Alicia," he said, handing her a clipboard. "Take some rest before it kills you." Alicia gave him a small smile, but it was the kind that never reached her eyes. "Rest comes when the streets do," she murmured. "And you and I both know that never happens." Marcus chuckled, but the worry in his eyes didn't fade. "You're going to run yourself into ground. And when that happens, it's not just you who pays the price. It's Jasmine, too." The mention of her daughter's name made Alicia's chest tighten. She thought of Jasmine's laughter, the way her curls bounced when she ran, the innocence she tried so hard to protect. For Alicia, every decision, every sacrifice was for her daughter. Still, something in Marcus's tone unsettled her. He was right. Jasmine deserved more than a mother who came home too tired to even sit at the dinner table. She brushed the thought away and started the engine. "Go home, Marcus. I'll see you tomorrow." As she pulled away from the precinct, the neon lights of a late-night diner flickered on the corner, and the laughter of teenagers spilled into the street. Alicia envied their carefree joy. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt that free. Responsibility had been shackled to her since the day she put on a badge, and even more so since she brought Jasmine into the world. Driving to the quiet suburban streets toward her neighborhood, she thought about the one person she still struggled to understand. Her father. Robert Monroe had always been complicated, strict, distant, sometimes cruel. He had been a looming figure in her childhood, the kind of man who demanded obedience but never gave affection. She had cut ties with him more than once, but life had a way of pulling him back into her orbit, especially after Jasmine was born. Against her better judgment, she let him play the role of grandfather. She told herself it was harmless. She told herself people could change. The truth was, Alicia wanted Jasmine to have what she never did, a family that felt whole. But as she pulled into her driveway that night, she felt a familiar unease crawl into her chest. Something about her father always set her on edge. She couldn't explain why. She killed the engine and sat in silence, staring at the dimly lit windows of her home. The Florida night was alive with the chirp of crickets, but inside her chest, there was only the sound of her own pounding heart. She didn't know it yet, but within hours, the badge she wore so proudly would no longer matter. The law she had sworn to uphold would shatter under the weight of blood and betrayal. And Alicia Monroe, the cop, the daughter, the mother, would make a choice that would define her forever. The house was quiet when Alicia stepped inside, her keys jingling softly as she dropped them on the counter. Jasmine's sneakers were by the door, a sign that her daughter was home, probably curled up at her phone or homework. Alicia loosened her holster, setting her service weapon on the table with a sigh of relief. At least here, in the modest comfort of her own home, she could finally breathe, or so she thought. Her gaze drifted to the framed photographs on the wall, snapshots of birthdays, school plays, beach trips with Jasmine. And there, in the corner, was another picture, Jasmine sitting on the porch steps beside Robert, her father. The sight of it made Alicia's chest tighten. To an outsider, it looked like an ordinary grandfather-granddaughter moment, his hand resting on Jasmine's shoulder, both smiling at the camera. But to Alicia, it was a reminder of a man she had never fully trusted. Robert Monroe had been the kind of father who believed discipline was love. As a child, Alicia learned quickly that his voice carried more weight than any hand ever could. He never hugged her, never told her he was proud. Instead, he measured affection in chores done right and rules obeyed. Her mother had left when Alicia was still young, leaving her in the grip of a man whose approval she chased but never earned. By the time Alicia was old enough to leave home, she promised herself she would never look back. But then Jasmine was born, and suddenly the past came creeping into her present. Robert had appeared at the hospital, uninvited, holding flowers, insisting he wanted to be a part of his granddaughter's life. Against her instincts, Alicia let him in. Maybe she was tired of fighting. Maybe she wanted Jasmine to have the family she never had. Maybe, just maybe, she believed people could change. For a while, it seemed harmless. Robert would take Jasmine for ice cream, bring her little gifts, talk about old times. He was strict with her, yes, but in a way that seemed almost protective. Neighbors saw him mowing Alicia's lawn and waved, remarking how wonderful it was that she had her father's support. To the world, Robert Monroe was the picture of a doting grandfather. But Alicia knew better than to trust pictures. There were moments, small, fleeting moments, that unsettled her. The way Robert's hand lingered on Jasmine's showed her a second too long. The way his eyes followed her as she walked into the room. Alicia told herself she was imagining it, that her years as a detective had made her suspicious of everything. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. One evening, over coffee with her closest friend Janet Lawson, Alicia let the unease slip. Janet, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes, leaned forward across the table. "Alicia," she said quietly, "sometimes the monsters aren't on the streets. They're in our homes." Alicia stiffened, her jaw tightening. "Don't say that. My father may be tough, but he's not. He can't be." Janet didn't flinch. "You've seen enough predators to know how they hide. You'd arrest a man in a heartbeat if he looked at a stranger's daughter the way your father looks at Jasmine." The word stung. Alicia wanted to protest, to defend Robert, but the truth was that Janet's voice echoed the very thoughts she had been trying to bury. She pressed her palms against her coffee cup, letting the heat burn her skin, grounding herself in the pain rather than the fear creeping in. Later that night, as Alicia tucked Jasmine into bed, her daughter yawned and whispered, "Grandpa said he wants to take me fishing this weekend. Just the two of us." Alicia's stomach dropped. She kissed her daughter's forehead, forcing a smile, but inside, alarms were blaring. Fishing trips had been Robert's thing when she was a girl. Too, the one-on-one outings where he could assert his control. She remembered the sharp words, the way he broke her down until she felt small. And now he wanted Jasmine alone. That night, lying awake in the dark, Alicia stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above her. The doubts she had pushed aside for years now crowded her thoughts. Could she really be overreacting? Or was she seeing the truth too late? The family ties that had bound her to Robert were unraveling, thread by thread. And Alicia knew, with a sickening certainty, that something was coming. Something that would tear apart everything she had tried so hard to build. It was a Thursday evening when Alicia's instinct screamed louder than her exhaustion. She had wrapped up a late shift, paperwork stacked high on her desk, but something inside her urged her home earlier than planned. She couldn't explain why. Maybe it was Janet's words replaying in her head. Maybe it was the look in Jasmine's eyes when she mentioned the fishing trip. Whatever it was, Alicia decided to skip the late coffee with Marcus and drive straight back. The streets were quieter than usual. Florida nights had their own kind of stillness, a humid silence that carried both comfort and danger. As she pulled into her driveway, Alicia noticed the porch light was off. That struck her as odd. Jasmine always kept it on for her. She stepped inside, setting her badge and keys on the counter, like always. But the air felt different. Heavy. The kind of heavy that makes your skin prickle before your mind can name the fear. She listened. No sound of music from Jasmine's room. No hum of the TV. Just silence. Thick and unnatural. Her eyes moved to the faint glow spilling down the hallway. The light from her daughter's room. Alicia's heart picked up, each beat pounding in her ears like a warning drum. She told herself it was nothing, that Jasmine was probably reading before bed. But the detective in her, the mother in her, both knew better. Step by step, she moved down the hall. Each creak of the floorboard felt louder than the last. Her hand brushed against the wall, as if steadying herself for impact. And then she heard it, muffled sounds, low and unmistakable. Her breath caught in her throat. When she pushed open Jasmine's door, the world around her shattered. The sight before her froze her blood. Robert, her father, the man she had tried so hard to forgive, was hunched over Jasmine, his body pressed too close, his hands where they should never be. Jasmine's wide, tear-filled eyes locked on her mother, a silent cry for help. "Dad!" Alicia's voice cracked, disbelief laced with fury. "What are you doing?" Robert turned his head, slowly, like a man caught in a storm he thought he could weather. His face showed no shame, no fear, only annoyance at being interrupted. "You weren't supposed to see this," he said coldly, his voice dripping with defiance. Alicia's vision blurred with rage. For a split second, she saw herself as a child again, small under his shadow, powerless. But now she was not powerless. She was a mother, a protector, and she was armed. Her hand went to her holster out of instinct, pulling her service weapon in one fluid motion. The weight of it in her hands was familiar, but never had it felt this heavy. "Get away from her," she shouted, her voice shaking, half command, half plea. Jasmine whimpered, curling into herself, her small hands clutching the blanket. Robert straightened, his expression hardening. "She doesn't understand. She needs to learn." His tone was chilling, like this was all justified in his twisted mind. Alicia's finger trembled on the trigger. She had spent her entire career practicing restraint, following procedure, waiting for backup. But this wasn't a suspect in an alley. This wasn't a stranger. This was her father, and it was her daughter. "Don't make me do this," she said through clenched teeth, her eyes burning with tears. Robert took one step closer, the room shrinking, the air suffocating. "You're weak, Alicia." Always were. Something in her snapped. The past collided with the present. Every scar he left on her soul igniting into fire. Her hand steadied. Her voice dropped into a whisper meant only for herself. "Not anymore." Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Alicia's breath came in short, jagged bursts as she gripped her weapon with both hands, her arms rigid but trembling from the weight of what she was about to do. Jasmine's muffled sobs filled the room like a broken melody, each sound tearing into Alicia's chest. Her daughter's innocence, her very soul, was being devoured by the same man who had once controlled Alicia's childhood. "Step away." Alicia shouted, her voice cracking. "Step away from her now." Robert's eyes locked onto hers, unflinching, cold, a predator cornered yet unrepentant. He sneered, as though she were the one at fault. "Put the gun down, Alicia. You don't pull that trigger. You don't have it in you." The words hit like a taunt, a challenge carved into her memory from years of being under his thumb. She remembered every slammed door, every cruel lecture, every time he reminded her she wasn't enough. And now, with Jasmine's tears soaking the pillow, Alicia understood with crystalline clarity. This was a moment her entire life had been building toward. "Don't test me," she hissed, her finger curling tighter against the trigger. "Not this time." For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. Robert tilted his head, almost amused. He took a deliberate step toward her, defiance radiating from his every movement. "You'll always be the little girl I controlled," he spat. "You can't change that." And that was it. The first shot thundered through the room, deafening. The recoil jarred her arms as the muzzle flash lit up the darkness. Robert staggered, shock flashing across his face. But he didn't fall. Alicia's pulse pounded in her ears. She didn't think. She reacted. Another shot. Then another. The third bullet tore through the silence like judgment itself. Jasmine screamed, her voice breaking under the weight of fear and relief. Robert collapsed to one knee, blood soaking through his shirt. His eyes, still filled with that same twisted defiance, met hers one last time. Alicia's grip tightened, her chest heaving. "Not anymore," she whispered again, and pulled the trigger twice more. The fourth and fifth shots rang out, final and absolute. Robert's body jerked, then crumpled to the floor lifeless, his shadow no longer looming over them. The smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air, mixing with the metallic tang of blood. Alicia's arms dropped to her sides, the gun slipping from her hands and clattering onto the hardwood. She collapsed to her knees, her body shaking with sobs. She could no longer hold back. The room spun as the enormity of what she had done crashed down around her. "Mom!" Jasmine cried, scrambling from the bed to wrap her arms around Alicia. The girl's hands were trembling, her face streaked with tears, but she clung to her mother with desperate force. Alicia pulled her close, pressing her lips against Jasmine's hair, whispering, "You're safe now. You're safe. I promise you're safe." The words tumbled out like a prayer, like a vow etched into her bones. Yet even as she held her daughter, Alicia knew there would be no peace after this. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. The badge she wore, the oath she had taken, they all felt like ashes now. Outside, the neighborhood was still quiet, but the echo of those 5 shots would soon ripple far beyond the walls of that small Florida home. The truth would come crashing in. Neighbors calling 911, patrol cars screaming down the street, reporters sniffing out the scandal. But in that moment, with Jasmine clinging to her and Robert's body cooling on the floor, Alicia didn't care about the law or the courts or the judgment of the world. She cared only about the trembling child in her arms. And for the first time in her life, Alicia Monroe felt both the crushing weight and the fierce freedom of choosing her daughter over everything else. The silence after the gunfire was unbearable. It pressed against Alicia's ears, ringing, as if the world itself had stopped breathing. She could hear only Jasmine's sobs, shallow and broken, and the uneven thud of her own heartbeat hammering through her chest. Robert's body lay sprawled on the floor, a grotesque reminder that the nightmare was over. But the storm had only just begun. Alicia forced herself to move. She picked up the gun with shaking hands, engaging the safety before setting it on the dresser. Her instincts as a cop fought against the mother's raw panic, each voice inside her head screaming different orders. Then came the sound that would change everything. A neighbor's shout from outside. "Call 911. Somebody call 911. I heard shots." Within moments, the distant wail of sirens broke through the night. Red and blue lights flickered faintly against the horizon, growing brighter with every passing second. Alicia tightened her arms around Jasmine, whispering into her daughter's curls, "Stay with me, baby. Don't let go." The sirens grew louder. Then the crunch of tires on gravel filled the driveway. Floodlights washed across the house as officers moved in, their boots heavy on the front porch. A commanding voice rang out. "This is the police. Step outside with your hands visible." Alicia froze. The irony cut deep. She was the police. She had worn the badge, sworn the oath, walked into countless homes just like this, ordering suspects to surrender. And now, here she was, blood on her hands, a weapon discharged, a dead man on the floor. She kissed Jasmine's forehead, then whispered, "Stay behind me." With trembling resolve, Alicia stepped into the hallway, raising her empty hands. The front door burst open, and 2 uniformed officers rushed in, weapons drawn. The look on their faces shifted from alarm to stunned recognition. "Detective Monroe?" One of them stammered. Alicia's voice cracked. "He's down. He was hurting my daughter." Her hand shook in the air as tears streamed down her face. "I had no choice." The officers exchanged a glance, uncertainty written across their faces. They had trained under her, followed her lead on raids, trusted her judgment on crime scenes. Now she stood before them, both familiar and foreign, a colleague and a suspect. Paramedics hurried in behind them, pushing a stretcher, but stopped short when they saw Robert's body. One shook his head quietly, already knowing there was no saving him. Outside, the neighborhood had come alive. Porch lights flicked on up and down the street. Neighbors stood in clusters, whispering furiously as the red and blue strobes lit their shocked faces. Is that Detective Monroe's house? She shot somebody? No, I heard it was her own father. The whispers grew, carried on the humid Florida air, a chorus of disbelief. Alicia guided Jasmine out the door. Wrapping the girl in a blanket, an officer handed her. Jasmine's small frame shook as she buried her face in her mother's side. From the corner of her eye, Alicia saw Janet, her loyal friend, pushing through the crowd. Janet's face was pale, her voice barely steady as she reached the police line. "Let her talk to me," Janet pleaded. "Please, she needs me." But the officers kept Janet back, their duty outweighing compassion. Alicia was led to her patrol car, not in handcuffs yet, but with the same solemn weight. Her neighbors' eyes followed every step, some filled with pity, others with judgment. The night air was thick with the smell of rain and gunpowder. Alicia glanced once more at her house, the home she had tried to build into a sanctuary. Now it was nothing but a crime scene, evidence markers already being placed on the floor, cameras flashing. As Jasmine was ushered into the care of paramedics, her trembling voice cut through the chaos. "She saved me," she cried, clutching Alicia's hand as tightly as she could. "My mom saved me." The words pierced Alicia's heart, both a balm and a brand. She had saved her daughter, but the cost was unimaginable. The badge she wore, the career she built, the respect she had earned, all of it hung in the balance. And as a patrol car door closed behind her, Alicia knew the real fight had only just begun. The fluorescent lights inside the precinct flickered faintly, buzzing like angry hornets. Alicia sat alone in the small interrogation room, her hands clasped on the metal table. The cold steel beneath her palms reminded her of the holding cells she had walked past 1,000 times. Only this time, she wasn't the detective standing outside the glass. She was the one inside, waiting, trembling, trying to hold herself together. Her uniform still smelled faintly of smoke and gunpowder. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her face pale under the harsh light. The badge that once defined her was gone, stripped from her chest and placed in an evidence bag. For the first time in 15 years, Alicia felt utterly exposed. Just a mother, a daughter, and a suspect. The door creaked open, and Detective Marcus Hill stepped in. He carried a file under his arm, his expression grim. He closed the door behind him and sat down across from her, leaning forward slightly, elbows on the table. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was louder than any words could be. Finally, Marcus broke it. 5 shots, Alicia. Your father. You've got to tell me why. Her lips parted, but the words stuck in her throat. She looked down at her hands, shaking, the faint trace of blood under her fingernails haunting her. Marcus's tone softened. "I've known you for years. You've always been the one to pull us back when we wanted to cross the line. You've always been the one who said, 'Follow the book.' So why tonight? What pushed you past it?" Tears welled in her eyes as she finally raised her gaze to meet his. Her voice cracked, raw with grief. He was hurting Jasmine, Marcus. "My baby. I walked in and I saw him. I saw what he was doing to her. I couldn't wait. I couldn't let him take anything else from her." The words tumbled out, rag and broken. Alicia pressed a trembling hand against her chest, as if trying to hold her heart together. Marcus leaned back, his jaw tight, his eyes clouded with both fury and sympathy. He set the file down on the table, but didn't open it. "Are you saying your father was assaulting your daughter when you shot him?" Alicia nodded violently, tears streaming now. "Yes. He didn't stop when I told him to. He turned on me like I was the problem, like Jasmine's pain didn't matter. I had seconds to decide. Seconds. And I chose her." Her voice cracked into a sob, and she buried her face in her hands. The weight of her confession filled the room, pressing down on both of them. Marcus exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. He knew the procedure. Every word she said was recorded. Every statement would be scrutinized by prosecutors. But sitting across from Alicia, he wasn't just a detective. He was a man listening to a friend heart shatter. "You know what this looks like from the outside, right?" he said quietly. "A decorated officer shoots her own father 5 times. The jury's going to see blood before they see the truth." Alicia lifted her head, her eyes blazing through her tears. "Then I'll tell them. I'll tell anyone who asks. I'm not ashamed of protecting my daughter. I'd do it again." The conviction in her voice sent a chill through Marcus. He had seen hardened criminals deny their sins, seen mothers weep for children they couldn't save. But this was different. This was a woman who had done the unthinkable, and yet believed it was the only choice left to her. The door opened again, and a prosecutor stepped in, expression unreadable. "Detective Monroe, we'll need your formal statement. You'll be processed tonight." Marcus gave her a lingering look, a silent promise that he believed her, even if the law would not. Alicia drew in a shaky breath, wiping her face with the back of her sleeve. She had spent her life interrogating others, breaking down their lies, exposing their truths. Now, the tables had turned, and as the recorder clicked on, Alicia knew her own truth would either save her or destroy her. That night, long before the trial, Alicia lay awake in the holding cell, her back pressed against the cold wall. Sleep refused to come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Robert's face, the sneer, the arrogance, the way he had stepped forward as if he still owned her. But beneath that, other images flickered. She saw herself as a little girl, sitting at the dinner table, trembling as Robert's voice boomed over some trivial mistake. She remembered her mother's absence, the silence of the house after she left, and the way Robert's rules became iron chains around her childhood. No hugs, no bedtime stories, only discipline, only fear. Alicia pressed her palms to her eyes, fighting the tears. "You always told me I was weak," she thought, "that I would never stand on my own. And maybe I believed you back then, but I don't anymore. Tonight, I proved you wrong." Her thoughts drifted to Jasmine, safe in protective custody, likely curled up in a strange bed, clutching a blanket that smelled nothing like home. Alicia's heart broke at the thought of her daughter being dragged through interviews with strangers, forced to tell what no child should ever have to speak. She whispered into the silence, "I'm sorry, baby. I wish you never had to see what you saw. I wish I could have carried it all alone." For the first time in her life, Alicia realized how deeply her father's shadow had ruled her, and yet, in pulling the trigger, she had shattered that shadow. What terrified her now wasn't prison, or the loss of her badge. It was whether Jasmine would ever feel safe again. The clanging of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Detective Marcus Hill appeared at the bars, his face etched with exhaustion. He didn't speak right away. He simply stood there, watching her, his presence both comforting and painful. Finally, he said quietly, "I've seen you stare down armed men, Alicia. I've seen you walk into gunfire and keep your head. But tonight you look like a soldier coming back from war. And I don't know if the war is over for you." Alicia swallowed hard, her throat raw. "It's not over, Marcus. It won't ever be. Not for me, not for her. But I'll take her pain if I can. I'd carry it all if it meant she could live free." Marcus nodded, his eyes heavy with understanding. "Then maybe that's what makes you different from the rest of us. You weren't just protecting her body. You were breaking the chains he tied around both of you." Alicia turned her face to the wall, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. For the first time since the shooting, she allowed herself to feel something close to release. Not peace, but the faintest glimmer of it. By the time Alicia's trial began, the story had already swept across Florida like wildfire. The headlines were relentless. Policewoman shoots father 5 times in shocking family murder. Outside the courthouse, reporters lined the steps, their cameras flashing, their voices shouting for answers. To some, Alicia was a monster, a daughter who turned her gun on her own blood. To others, she was a mother who had done what any parent would do, protect her child at all costs. Inside, the courtroom pulsed with tension. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee. Alicia sat at the defense table, her navy suit hanging loosely on her frame, the weight of sleepless nights carved into her face. Her attorney, Caroline Mitchell, sat beside her, calm and composed, with steel-gray hair pulled neatly into a bun. Caroline was known for her unshakable presence, and today Alicia needed that more than ever. Across the room, the prosecutor adjusted his tie, his expression sharp and unforgiving. He spoke first, his voice ringing with authority. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not about emotion. It is about law. Detective Monroe shot an unarmed man, her own father, 5 times. 5. This was not restraint. This was not defense. This was murder." The words landed like blows. Alicia's stomach twisted, her hands clenching in her lap. She wanted to scream that her father had not been unarmed. He had been a weapon himself, his body, his will, his control over her daughter. But all she could do was sit silently as the prosecutor painted her as a killer. Then Caroline rose, her presence commanding but compassionate. She stepped toward the jury, her voice steady, carrying the quiet strength of a woman who believed in justice beyond black and white. "You will hear the facts, and you will hear the law, but you must also hear the truth. Alicia Monroe is not just a police officer. She is a mother. And on that night, she walked into her home to find her father violating her 15-year-old daughter. She ordered him to stop. He did not. She begged him to move away. He advanced. And in that moment, Alicia made the only choice any mother could have made. She saved her child. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Alicia lowered her head, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. The prosecution called as witnesses first neighbors who heard gunshots, officers who responded to the scene. They described the blood, the chaos, the weapon on the floor. To them, it looked like a crime scene without context, just another body lying cold on hardwood. But then came the defense's turn, and Caroline called Jasmine. The room hushed as the teenager walked to stand, dressed in a simple blue dress. Her hands trembling, Jasmine looked far younger than her age. Alicia's heart ached watching her daughter swear the oath, her small voice barely audible as she promised to tell the truth. Caroline approached gently, her tone soft, motherly. "Jasmine, can you tell the jury what happened that night?" Jasmine's lips quivered, her eyes glistening. She glanced at her mother, then back at the jury. I was in my room. Grandpa came in. At first, he said he just wanted to talk. But then he started touching me." Her voice cracked and a sob escaped. "I told him to stop. I begged him, but he wouldn't. And when Mom came in, I thought..." Her voice broke completely. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. The judge banged the gavel lightly, instructing the jury to remain composed. Jasmine forced herself to continue, her voice trembling but fierce. When she saw him, she told him to get away. He didn't stop. He looked at her like she was nothing. I was so scared. And then she saved me. Her last words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The courtroom was silent, except for the muffled sound of people shifting in their seats, some wiping tears from their eyes. Alicia buried her face in her hands, overcome with emotion. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt her daughter's voice speak the truth she couldn't put into words. Caroline placed a gentle hand on Jasmine's shoulder before turning to the jury. "You heard it yourselves. This was not premeditated. This was not revenge. This was a mother choosing her daughter's life over her father's crime. The law is clear, but so is justice. Alicia Monroe does not deserve prison. She deserves mercy." The judge's gavel came down again, signaling the end of testimony for the day. The jury sat stiff, their faces grave, their hearts caught between the black letters of the law and the living testimony of a child. As Alicia was escorted out of the courtroom, her eyes met Jasmine's. A silent promise passed between them. No matter what happened next, they had survived the darkest night together. The courthouse grew quieter as the trial moved into its final stretch. The lawyers had made their closing arguments. The witnesses had spoken, and now 12 men and women carried the burden of judgment. Alicia sat at the defense table, her body stiff with dread, watching the jury file out of the courtroom to deliberate. Every step they took echoed like a countdown. She folded her hands together, whispering a silent prayer. Please let them see the truth. Let them see I wasn't a monster. I was just a mother protecting her child. The waiting was unbearable. Hours dragged by in a holding room where Alicia and her attorney sat. Caroline Mitchell maintained her steady composure, sipping coffee, reviewing her notes as if preparing for another battle. But Alicia couldn't find stillness. She paced, her thoughts racing back to Jasmine's trembling voice on the stand. Her daughter had been so brave. But was it enough? Caroline finally spoke, her tone calm but deliberate. The jury has everything they need. Alicia. They heard Jasmine. They saw the truth in her eyes. It will weigh on them. Alicia pressed her palms to her forehead. But will it outweigh the law? He was unarmed. Caroline. That's all the prosecutor kept saying. An unarmed man shot 5 times. Caroline leaned forward, her eyes sharp. The law isn't just about weapons. It's about threat. And your father was a threat in the most brutal way possible. Don't lose hope. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the 12 jurors sat around a long oak table, the weight of their decision hanging thick in the air. The foreman, a middle-aged man with a stern jaw, began the discussion. All right, let's put it on the table. Did Alicia Monroe commit murder, or did she act to save her daughter? A younger juror, her voice soft but resolute, spoke first. If that were my daughter, I'd do the same. The girl's testimony was heartbreaking. He was hurting her. What else could Alicia have done? Another juror, older, with graying hair, shook his head. The law says deadly force is justified if your life, or someone else's, is in immediate danger. Was her daughter's life in danger, or was it something else? What he did was monstrous, but was it lethal in that moment? The room grew tense. A third juror leaned forward, frustration in his voice. You're telling me a child being assaulted is in immediate danger? You think she should have paused, called for backup, let her daughter suffer while she waited? The older juror frowned, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. I'm saying the law is black and white. If we bend it for her, where does it stop? Silence followed. The dilemma cut to the heart of justice. Law versus humanity. In the courtroom, Alicia's mind spun with memories. She thought of her father's sneer, his cold defiance. She thought of Jasmine's sobs, the way her little hands clung to her mother after the shots rang out. Alicia's stomach twisted with guilt and righteousness all at once. Did I pull the trigger too many times? Did I cross a line? Or was it the only way to make sure he never touched her again? Back in the jury room, the debate raged. She's a cop, one juror argued. She knows procedure. She knows restraint. But she didn't restrain. She executed him. No, another countered sharply. She's not just a cop. She's a mother who walked in on her father destroying her daughter's life. Don't strip her of her humanity just because she wears a badge. Hours stretched into the evening. The foreman finally spoke again, his voice heavy. Look, we can't deny she fired 5 shots. That's excessive. But we also can't deny the testimony. The girl said her mother saved her. We all saw it in her eyes. Around the table, heads nodded slowly. The tension in the room shifted from conflict to reluctant unity. They knew what the law demanded, but they also knew what justice required. When the jury finally knocked on the door, signaling their decision, the courtroom stirred back to life. Reporters whispered frantically. Neighbors filled the gallery with expectant silence. Alicia's heart pounded in her chest as the jurors filed back in, their faces somber, unreadable. The foreman held a folded piece of paper, his hands steady but his eyes weary. The judge cleared his throat. Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict? The foreman nodded, his voice carrying across the courtroom. We have, Your Honor. Alicia closed her eyes. She could barely breathe. The fate of her life, her daughter's future, and the meaning of justice itself was about to be spoken aloud. The courtroom felt colder than ever. Every pair of eyes fixed on the jury box. Breaths held in collective suspense. Alicia sat rigid, her hands clenched together so tightly her knuckles turned white. Beside her, Caroline Mitchell whispered, Breathe, Alicia. Whatever comes, you face it with strength. But Alicia couldn't breathe. Her entire life, her career, her daughter's future. Everything teetered on the edge of one sentence. The foreman handed the folded slip of paper to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Judge Morrison adjusted his glasses, unfolded the verdict, and read silently for what felt like an eternity. The silence was unbearable. The shuffle of papers, the faint cough from the gallery, the scratching of a reporter's pen, all of it echoed in Alicia's ears. Finally, the judge looked up. His voice was calm but carried the weight of destiny. On the charge of murder in the second degree, we, the jury, find the defendant, Detective Alicia Monroe. A pause. Alicia's heart hammered against her ribs. She reached for the table to steady herself, her vision blurring with tears. Not guilty. The words shattered the tension like glass breaking. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Some wept openly. Others whispered in disbelief. Reporters scrambled to jot down the moment, cameras clicking furiously. Alicia collapsed forward, her hands covering her face as sobs of relief racked her body. Caroline placed a firm, reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's over," she whispered. "You're free." Across the courtroom, Jasmine cried out, "Mom!" Her voice cracked with pure relief. She rushed forward before the bailiff could stop her, throwing her arms around Alicia. Mother and daughter clung to each other, trembling, tears soaking their cheeks. The jury watched, some with damp eyes, as the truth of the decision played out in raw, human form. The prosecutor's face was stone, his jaw tight, but even he did not rise to argue. The law had spoken, but more importantly, so had justice. Judge Morrison banged his gavel for order, though his own voice carried a softness rarely heard in his courtroom. This court recognizes a jury's verdict. Detective Monroe, you are released from custody immediately. As the bailiff removed the restraint from her wrists, Alicia's hands trembled. She rubbed the raw marks, a small but symbolic gesture of freedom. For the first time in months, she was no longer a prisoner of both the law and her own guilt. Outside, the courthouse steps were a storm of flashing lights and shouted questions. "Detective Monroe, how do you feel? Do you regret firing 5 shots? What comes next for you and your daughter?" Caroline shielded her with a firm hand, guiding her through the chaos. But Jasmine, holding tightly to her mother's side, answered for both of them with the clarity of a child. "My mom saved me," she cried. "That's all anyone needs to know." The crowd hushed at those words, even the reporters faltering for a moment. The truth had already been spoken in court, but hearing it again, so pure, so unshakable, resonated deeper than any headline ever could. Alicia finally stepped into the sunlight, her eyes blinking against the glare. She inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with the Florida air. For months, every breath had felt like drowning. Now, for the first time, she felt the possibility of freedom. But freedom did not mean peace. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. The badge she had once worn with pride would never sit on her chest again. The whispers in her community, the judgment of strangers, the haunting memory of her father's face, these would follow her for the rest of her life. Yet as she held Jasmine's hand, feeling her daughter's small fingers entwined with hers, Alicia knew she could bear it, because in the end, she had chosen right. She had chosen her daughter. As mother and child descended the courthouse steps together, their shadows long in the afternoon sun, Alicia whispered softly, almost to herself but loud enough for Jasmine to hear, "We survived. That's what matters." And with that, they walked into an uncertain future, not free of pain, but free to face it together. Weeks had passed since the verdict, but the echoes of that trial lingered everywhere Alicia went. In the grocery store, she felt eyes follow her. At the gas station, conversations hushed when she walked by. Some whispered with sympathy, others with suspicion. She had become a symbol, a policewoman who killed her own father, acquitted by the jury but judged by the world. Alicia no longer wore the badge. She had turned it in the morning after the trial, laying it on the chief's desk without a word. The chief had nodded solemnly, offering a handshake she barely felt. She knew she couldn't return to the force, not after everything. The uniform that once gave her purpose now felt like a weight she couldn't carry. But even stripped of her title, Alicia discovered a different kind of strength. Each day, she woke up not as Detective Monroe, but as Jasmine's mother, And that was enough. The Florida sun blazed hot as ever, but now Alicia noticed it differently. The warmth on her skin, the salt in the air when she and Jasmine walked along the shoreline. Life no longer moved at the frantic pace of police sirens and case files. Instead, it moved in small, quiet moments. Jasmine's laughter returning after weeks of silence, the comfort of shared meals at their kitchen table, the healing power of simply surviving together. One evening, Alicia sat on the porch swing, watching the sky turn shades of violet and gold. Jasmine came outside, her hair loose, a book tucked under her arm. She sat beside her mother, leaning her head against her shoulder. For a long while, they said nothing. The cicadas sang in the distance, the night settling in like a soft blanket. Finally, Jasmine broke the silence. "Mom, do you ever regret it?" Alicia closed her eyes, the question cutting deep. She thought of the gunshots, the recoil burning in her arms, her father's lifeless body on the floor. She thought of the courtroom, the whispers, the verdict. Then she looked at her daughter, the very reason she had pulled the trigger. "No," she said softly. "I regret that it had to happen. I regret that he was the man I had to face. But I don't regret saving you. Not for a second." Jasmine's eyes welled, and she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're my hero, Mom." The words broke something inside Alicia, not in pain, but in release. For months she had carried guilt like a chain, questioning whether she had crossed a line she could never return from. But hearing those words from her daughter gave her something the courtroom never could: peace. News crews eventually moved on, chasing fresher scandals. But Alicia knew the story of what happened in her house would never fully fade. It would always exist in the corners of conversations, in the footnotes of true crime shows, in the unspoken questions of strangers. Yet as she watched Jasmine chase the surf on the beach, laughing freely for the first time in months, Alicia realized that the world's judgment didn't matter. What mattered was a girl who still had her future intact, who could walk through life unbroken because her mother had chosen to protect her. On the anniversary of that night, Alicia and Jasmine lit a single candle on the porch, not to honor Robert, but to mark the end of his shadow over their lives. As the flame flickered against the dark, Alicia whispered a silent vow that she would spend the rest of her days giving Jasmine the safety and love she herself had been denied. Justice had not been found in a courtroom. It had been found in a mother's decision, in 5 deafening shots that severed the past and safeguarded the future. And though the scars would remain, Alicia Monroe walked forward not as a disgraced cop, not as a broken daughter, but as a mother who chose her child above all else. That was her justice, and it was enough.